That is me. Oh, I was just looking for that.
All right, great.
Good
Thank
work.
you. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is the City of Aspen City Council work session.
Bam, you're on.
Now we're there.
Hey, yeah.
This is the Aspen City Council work session for July 5th, 2022. Happy July 5th to everybody. Welcome back to Sarah. And we have one item on our agenda this evening, which is the Arts and Culture Grant Program expansion. John, are you going to introduce the item tonight?
Sarah wanted to introduce us.
Hello, it's welcome. Thank you for welcoming me back. It's good to be with you all again. I just had a couple of things to share before we get into a little more of the detail in tonight's Arts and Culture Grants expansion. And a lot of tonight's conversation is not to become to walk out of here with absolutes or definite positions on things. It's really today starting to get your feel of the council as individuals and collectively around how the additional dollars should be made available in the community. Is it through the expansion of the current program? Is it adding new programs? Is it a combination of the two? Those are all decisions certainly for the City Council to provide direction on to staff. The other thing I would offer with it is that it's a reiterative process. So even if we talk about dollar amounts today, they're not going to be really final. I'll come back to you with recommendations in the 2023 budget when I bring it to you about what I think makes sense for the fund and a rate of growth of the programming of which we can appropriately staff. I don't want to grow the programming so fast that it's not being managed well. So with that little precursor, I will turn it over to our team here and let John take things away. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving into a bit of a background of the Arts and Culture Grant Program, because it's been a few months since we've talked about this. So the Arts and Culture Grant Program is a division of one of the broader grant support that the City of Aspen provides for our community. It is the only division that is eligible for the increased, the potential increase in RET funding. We've given out through the Arts and Culture Program specifically over $3 million since 2015 and more previous to that, with a budget of between $350,000 and $400,000 up until last year, where council increased that amount to $600,000 during the approval process. The Arts and Culture Grant Division specifically is the most popular city program by request amount. It regularly receives the highest dollar amount in requests of any of our three primary divisions, and it supports organizations all throughout the Roaring Fork Valley, which historically has meant between Aspen and Rifle are eligible to apply for funding. All of the ideas and proposals that we'll go over tonight are rooted in council's two very important statements given by council: the overall grants program philosophy, which provides direction on the umbrella of our grants, as well as the arts and culture strategic focus area. So each of the components of the expansion that we'll go over tonight are rooted in that language and direction from council. As Sarah mentioned, the goal for tonight's session is to keep things relatively high level, and we have questions for council at the end of the presentation surrounding vision, approximate funding amounts, and alternatives to what we discussed tonight. So before we move too much further, I want to give council an opportunity to look at these two important statements that form the foundation of what we're going to discuss tonight. Right, this is our program philosophy, where council asks for our grants to support cultural enrichment and innovation, particularly, and those are the two items that I hope to convey tonight. And then honing in on our arts and culture strategic focus area specifically, you'll see that cultural vibrancy is mentioned, and that is a primary goal of what staff is trying to accomplish with this expansion is to support our arts and cultural organizations and ultimately boost the cultural vibrancy of our community.
Do we know what we mean by ease of access in that statement? You know, is it about the prices that they're charging to get in? Is it, what is ease of access to the arts?
So that has not been further defined by council than
Sorry, I will repeat the question for GrassRoots. I was wondering, what is the term ease of access meaning in the grant program philosophy?
What I can share with you is when we were coming up with the recommendations, the grant steering committee was looking at ease of access. As John stated, it hasn't been clearly defined in our council work session when we had council approval with that, but the theory behind it was related to all of the above in terms of accessibility and cost and focused on inclusivity.
Okay, so we'll asking. It's red, I mean, it's green now. You got that, Amy? Is it working? No. Okay, thank you. Is that something that when we do the next set of reviews, we will be asking people what are their average ticket prices and getting some sense of the accessibility, or, you know, or is that something we shouldn't necessarily have in the philosophy if we're not finding a way to benchmark it and check it?
We have a upcoming work session scheduled with council for July 18th, where we are going over some broader policy changes as well as an after-action report from a consultant over the changes that were made in the previous year. And we can certainly dig into this a little bit more then, but I can tell you quickly that we have are proposing to change our application questions to provide better information about this type of thing.
Okay, that sounds great, thank you.
Right, next slide. So with those two guiding documents in mind, I also want to share the ballot measure, because it's important that all of the proposed changes that we're discussing tonight also be rooted in the language that we ask the voters. And that's included here, and the grant steering committee, as well as staff, really reflected on this language to make sure that it was in line with what we felt like we were asking the voters with this ballot question. So you can see here the primary statement here is for the purpose of supporting the cultural, visual, and performing arts, including the Aspen Red Brick Center, which you'll see is an important component of this expansion as well. So the ballot measure did pass with popular support. Right? We had 71% of the vote in favor. 60% was required in order to secure passage, so we were well above that. It allows for expanded use of the arts, but what's most important, right, is that any program is sustainable and is responsible and provides for the three primary uses of funding, which is the Wheeler, the Red Brick, and then the grants. It's also just one last statement on this, right, is that the passage of this measure was a true community effort, and the Aspen arts and cultural organizations were very supportive and provided the outreach and organizing that was very important in the eventual passage of this measure, and their support is noted and important to its success. So what are we trying to do with this proposal is really focused on four primary areas. So the first is holistic support. So the arts and culture grants traditionally have been a discretionary granting program, right, where an organization submits a proposal for what they'd like to do with our funds, And we have a volunteer committee who scores and assesses those applications and then makes funding recommendations based on the overall quality of those applications. We are trying to provide new avenues of support to our community beyond that, and that includes providing some support at the individual artist level, as well as supporting these organizations' facilities and material needs. So we have 3 different programs that are all designed to stimulate a different area of our community to provide the most meaningful support that we can. That being said, it's important that fiscal responsibility is of the highest priority, right? And so we need to make sure that we're designing a program that is sustainable over the long term in varying economic conditions. Of course, right now, our RET funding collections are well above average, but we don't want to design a program that requires 2021 and 2022 level collections in order to be sustainable. We also have new resources within grant staff to allow new levels of follow-up with our organizations to ensure that money is being spent appropriately and effectively and efficiently in our community. So we are very excited to be able to start doing site visits with our organizations to learn more about what's going on and the impact that city funding is having at the ground level. Again, making sure that everything we do is aligned with that overall grant program philosophy that council has adopted, as well as that focus area. Those are the 2 documents that we've fallen back on throughout this entire process. And then lastly, this is an iterative process, right? We are proposing 2 new programs that are pilot programs. We want to see if this is the best and most effective way to support our community. And we are hopeful that these programs will help us gauge the right level of support that's needed and in the right fashion. So the intention here is to try these 2 new programs out in 2023, get community feedback, see if it was having the impact that council hopes it does, and go back and check and see if it's the right way to move forward in future years. Lastly, we'll need to ensure that funding is appropriate on a yearly basis, right? And so as RET collections vary, the appropriate budgets for this program might need to vary as well. And so those would change on a yearly basis. Nice. So with that, we move into the initial funding proposal. As you can see, last year we had just one Arts and Culture Grant Division, and that was budgeted funded at $600,000. It was you may recall it was initially $400,000, and then council decided to increase that to $600,000 with the additional RET funding that was available from December 2021.
I have a question on that particular item. Is that money that can be repaid to the general fund from the Wheeler RET? That $200,000 we used to backfill the grant program last year, or the funding for this year?
That, let me double check. I believe council directed us to use funding from the Wheeler RET, but I'm a little rusty. I've only been back on the clock 4 hours. Oh. So I will double check.
What are you doing here?
Yeah. I think we should double check, but I had thought that there was enough collections in the Wheeler RET in December of 2021 to have covered the full amount, the original 200,000 we were adding in.
And that's why I need to go back and look at spring supplemental. I believe we did a technical adjustment to make that happen.
Yeah, my interest is in making the general fund whole if possible, and I know that the previous year that we had backfilled from the general fund to the grants program. So if there are $200,000 available to replenish the general fund, if those funds came out of the general fund, I'd like to know that, just be clear if it came out of the Wheeler RET or if out of the general fund.
Yeah.
Skibby?
Just a question about the additional funding level. I know you said we're, mindful of not having to have a record RET year to keep up with this, but, if we have a couple really bad RET years, if we go into a recession, there's not much on the market, do these funding levels allow us to continue that for kind of how long? Because I would hate to have to reduce levels over time.
Not long, because you only have since December 10th, I believe, of 2021 to now's collections. You can't go back and use what was in the fund prior to the certification of the election for the increased grants. That would be not a permitted use of the funds in accordance with the voter approvals on them.
So,
So you do not have much of a cushion.
yeah, go ahead.
I've been trying to drill down on that concept a little bit, and I don't think we'll get to hard numbers here today, but I had emailed Pete earlier today and tried to think of an easier way to ask my question, but it's like, what would need to be the collections on any one given year to do the new program for arts grants plus Wheeler operations? And what that total number is like our target. And that, I would call that a break-even year. It can do both of those things without going into reserves. Now, if it's less than whatever that number is, it's possible that we use Wheeler reserves for the operations for a period of time. And it'll be up to this board to decide how far down, or they would allow Wheeler reserves from the old collection to be used. And how much of it, if only 2 million came in and you want to do the grants program and you say, okay, we'll take 4 to 6 out of the Wheeler savings, that would be a different set of choices. But I'm not sure. I think that's what they're saying. Everyone's saying that you would always be able to sustain the same levels.
Yeah, I think that this opens the whole conversation that we had prior to putting it on the ballot is, what are the reserves for the Wheeler Fund? There'll be some years where we won't be able to perhaps funnel money back into the Wheeler Fund. What is the drawdown level? What do we want to leave in reserve? I know we've heard, 2 years or more of operations be left in the Wheeler Fund. What capital funds? I think there was $10 million in capital fund activity that was in the out years. So to have that whole conversation about where the Wheeler Fund is when as money flows in, there might be some years that there's not extra money to go to the Wheeler, the grant program, or do we use those years to use the Wheeler Fund for operations?
Right, and understanding that it's helpful, there's these buckets and we can kind of draw from the other. I think like my concern is not going so big now that, I don't expect it to be a 2009 type of situation, but if we're in a 2011, 2012 situation for 4 years, that we're not extending something that we have to take back,
I've thought about that too as well. And the one thing I've thought is that it'd be nice to start, since we're segregating the revenues based on when they were collected and the ballot that controls them, under the new monies, to be able to say, should we create a granting reserve pool? So that we're not expending it every year and maybe it builds up over time, so that if you have that off year out of new collections, you can have some stability or try to even out the peaks and valleys. But I don't know that we're there yet.
And administratively, that's what we do.
Yeah.
It's a matter of, though, whether you would like to memorialize that in some type of council policy in your financial documents, for example. When I look at this quandary, right, because that's what's one of the things that's tough about these numbers is exactly this issue of, at some point, we're not going to be selling at the rates we're selling today. I would suggest you think about things like maybe 1/3 of the Wheeler's cost each year comes from the new money. Or 1/3 only comes from the old money. Think about it in those kinds of policy terms, that you can provide direction, that will provide some analysis back to you of what that looks like. So, the Wheeler, roughly $3 million in operating cost a year. And so that's $1 million of fund balance you want to use a year when it's, I don't know what it is today, but we were at 34 million a few weeks ago when I checked. That's a long time to take that number down. And how do you want to balance then the capital component of it? Does the capital come out of that base? So when you look at the expansion of these programs, you know, it would be helpful for us is of those 3 different types of grant programs, prioritize them for us. What's the most important one? Where should we be spending our time developing the programs and interacting with the nonprofits to ask them more about how would this work? We'll do better with those priorities than trying to do all 3 of these at the same time. Just being realistic, and that would be a great piece of feedback for us. And we can then model some of these costs for you for the long-term benefit of the Arts and Culture Fund, because we also will want to talk a little bit later when we get into budget about capital for the red brick building, because it has some very basic needs that right now, as you know, the AMP will be struggling to support.
And
Thank
Sarah,
you.
just so I'm clear, when you're saying the prioritization of the 3 buckets, do you mean these 3 buckets here within this sort of side of it, or?
Right, in the arts and culture funding, right, you have your traditional grant program right up there that staff's recommended. Maybe you want to bump that up to $1 million for a year, see how that goes. And do you want to expand into these other 2 areas in 2023?
Got it.
And if so, is one of them more important than the other as the starting point of that expansion effort?
Okay, thank you.
So of those 3 new, or I suppose we're going to get to it, but for the capital needs of the red brick, which formerly came out of the general fund, could now come out of the Wheeler Rep because of the results of the election. So what those long-term capital needs are for the red brick is important to help plan.
And that's part of what I want to bring back to you this fall. We have about 800 to 850,000 of basic capital to operate the building that are needed, you know, aging mechanical systems, et cetera. But there's also a facility analysis going on that will be asking you, what should the investment for the future be into this building? And bringing you back some of the price tags to that and asking you, where does this fit in with your other priorities?
Just one more point of information, sir, you can, I know you can provide this. I think we funded a new boiler. Was that the red brick or the yellow brick?
Yellow brick.
Right now is the yellow brick, but we did the red brick, I thought.
Kind of an overhaul of it a couple of years ago.
Right, I thought we did it a while.
But yeah, and now the maintenance team is doing regular maintenance of it, so.
So the unit's under, I'm sorry, I'm just repeating so it's on the air. So there is regularly scheduled maintenance, which was something that we found maybe lacked a little bit in our previous building operator. And then to answer your question, the almighty Dr. Pete did text me to say, yes, we did make that change in
General
spring.
fund's been repaid.
Spring supplemental, so the general fund has been made whole.
Thank you, Pete. Wherever you are.
All right, so we can, if there's no further questions on this high level, and then there will be ample opportunity to discuss these numbers a little bit later, we can go into a little bit of more detail about the 3 specific programs. So this is the primary historically successful grant division. Overall, from a program and policy standpoint, very few changes being proposed. I think that this really represents a potential increase is just recognizing the contribution that the arts and cultural community makes, and allowing them the opportunity to increase their asks, as well as promoting the fair amount of eligible organizations who have sat on the sidelines thinking that there's not a place or a budget for them to hopefully start to apply and broaden our reach with the types and number of organizations that we support through our grant program. But fundamentally, what we are proposing here is just a recommitment to a historically successful program. The reason that this is the first one, and in our view, the most essential program, is it allows the granting organizations to identify and communicate with our volunteer reviewers about the items that are most important to them and most impactful to them, because each individual organization has the best view of how they can positively impact our community. The only risk here is managing expectations, right? As we increase our budget, we want to make sure that we still are communicating that this is a competitive grant process where the most impactful applications will be prioritized for funding. And it will be important that with an increased budget, that we maintain that expectation that that even in a year where perhaps there are lower scoring applications, there may be a time where the volunteer committees suggest that not all available funding be allocated. And that could be a challenging conversation, but it is important to ensure that funding is allocated towards the most impactful organizations.
Rachel?
Yeah, thank you. As we went through the process last year and looked at the results, there was, I know I at least raised a question about, are we really doing people fair with the formula if we're saying big arts organizations that may have a $6 million summer budget are competing and being scored on the same criteria as, you know, $15,000 or $8,000 small organizations? And we talked a little about should perhaps there be either a small arts group that's not competing as directly, or to look into the formula itself to say, you know, is there something with the formula that means, because it was just odd that last year when we went from 400,000 to 600,000, oh, okay, now some people at the bottom got funded. And I would hate to set up a system where we're potentially giving away 800,000 or over $1 million and not be able to say small groups matter too, and then small arts matter too. And I'm curious about that. How do we deal with that? You know, is it impactful to 3 people's lives, or is it impactful to 300 that matters to us? And it's similar to, I would say, the horse therapy type of group. It's very important for some people, but most people would say, why are we funding horse therapy for developmentally delayed kids, you know? And so I just was wondering, is this potential artist fellowship support something to take care of the small groups, or was that the thought, or we're just going with the same formula as last year and hope that more money put in will cover that?
Can you go over the distribution, because there's quite a few new smaller organizations funded through the new formula. I just don't remember how many.
There were, and we can get back to you on that exact number, but I do want to give you a brief overview, and again, we'll get into some of these more details about the program policy in a couple weeks, but we will be, historically, we've only had one application, no matter how much money you're asking for, and last year we attempted to resolve the issue that you are speaking of by having differing review criteria. So if you asked for a relatively small amount of money, I believe that cutoff was $10,000 last year, or maybe it was $5,000. The criteria for our volunteer reviewers is a little bit softer. So with the intention there of trying to ameliorate that difference between maybe a large organization having access to a professional grant writer and a small organization not. What we hope to implement for 2023 is 3 separate applications that ask different questions and have different levels of expectation around impact, different levels of expectation around quantitative impact reporting, and also financial health. So you can expect to see a little bit more about that next year. It's something that's very important to us to make sure that all types of organizations are funded fairly and consistently throughout the program.
Great, thank you so much for the detailed explanation.
Skippy?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, Rachel. And one of the things I remember from our conversation was not just the, relative sort of impact, number of people, scope, but it was also just, what sort of sophistication does a small organization where the same person doing the art has in sort of these more, bureaucratic processes. And it meant a lot to me that, you said how you really going out of the way to help people kind of coach them through that process. So I just kind of wanted to, use that opportunity to check in as we move into this tiered system. is that opportunity still available? Does someone have to know and ask, or are we kind of actively telling people? How will that work?
We,
If I'm jumping 2 weeks ahead, I apologize.
and
All right.
it is our plan to increase our offerings of grant writing workshops and trainings about what's expected and how to maximize your chances of submitting a successful application
Thank
this fall during the application window.
I'll stick to my designated question list from this packet now.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, though, Rachel, that we'll bring you back the list so you can see the awards? Because there was quite a few of them under 25,000, yeah.
I am familiar of the list and the paperwork from that, but no, I just was wondering, again, I'd like to see the type of 3 applications and the change and the things that were talked about for the next meeting, so.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so let's. So the next we have our Aspen Artist Fellowships, which this is a individual artist support program. And this program is rooted in both council's direction from our discussion this spring, where council expressed an interest in providing support directly to Aspen's artists. And I have Lisa Rixey-Peterson and Sarah Roy, the directors of the Wheeler and Red Brick here, and they are subject matter experts. If you have any questions, any detailed questions about this program, and I can give you a summary overview. So basically what this program hopes to do, and this is, again, a pilot program at a relatively modest budget to gauge the ability of a program like this to have the impact that we hope it does. But what it intends to do is to provide direct support to Aspen's artists, and in return, ask them to form cohorts and work together to explore ways that artists can have a greater impact in our community, and whether that means finding coaching opportunities for youth artists or other ways that the artists themselves can help devise, but just trying to find a way to connect Aspen's reputation as a world-class art destination and make that a year-round commitment where we are focused on Aspen artists who are here all year, contributing to the community all year, instead of the peaks and valleys of our cultural cycle that we have now.
Ward?
This kind of, on the capital one, next one we're going to talk about, where you had suggested maybe a 3-year evaluation period. For this first year on a new program for individual recipients, how are we going to, what is going to be the measure of success? In the first year, do you create a council of cohorts, for example, from recipients of grants or existing individual artists? How do we set up an evaluation to determine if this is successful and if these monies are how they're being spent, and if it's a program to continue?
Yeah, I think.
Do you want?
I just want to put it out there, you should not fundamentally believe that these dollars will turn into community benefit. It's the other way around. This is benevolent giving, which will have some community value in it by the request of the cohort. But this is really about developing those artists as individuals, as members of our community, much more than it is what does the community get back out of the financial investment.
Yeah, so how, is this going to be just a really nebulous thing? How do you determine a successful program?
I think we would have to develop that. There's a couple different models out there for this that we could definitely go borrow from. And I think the other thing is that we'd probably change the way these artists, we would not use the existing committee structure to choose these who's funded. Our current residents on the Arts and Culture Grant are not necessarily going to be able to measure what you're asking for. And I don't necessarily expect these applicants to be able to articulate it right away either. It might be something that comes from their creative process that then leads to. And respecting that there's a continuum that goes back and forth and that it's not linear objectives often when you're doing individual artist support. Do you want to add anything, Lisa or Sarah?
You got to come up to the
You have to come to the
microphone.
mic this time.
Hi, I'm Sarah, Director of the Red Brick Center for the Arts, and I totally agree with everything you're saying. And I'll just kind of give examples. If you were to give money to an artist, maybe what they would spend it on. They would spend it on, you know, new tools, new art paints, new pair of ballet shoes, taking a class, subsidizing their studio rent. And so all of these things, like Sarah kind of said, it's not what then we get back, it's investing in them because we believe in what they offer for our lives. These artists in our community are the ones teaching our kids piano lessons, teaching a Theater Aspen camp. They're the ones performing in our local theater productions. And so all of that is the joy and the value that we receive back from them. Did that help?
I was just thinking perhaps we should make a multi-year commitment to this because it's going to take a while for us, for the artists themselves to appreciate how some grants might enhance their activities or their livelihood or the quality of life in Aspen.
Not sure I agree, but John?
I just want to say, I kind of just see that we're talking about this is a success in and of itself. As an artist, I fully support this. I think, you know, a grant as little as $1,000 can give an artist just that extra little bit of time to work on what they want to work on, not what they are paid to work on. I think this is a tremendous opportunity for us and for our local artists.
Thanks. Rachel?
Yeah, I support this program as well. I think it's something that gets very hard to put up, you know, benchmarks. It's not the same as building a road or any number of other things we can look at. But I do think it's important, and I'm sitting here going, God, where did I just read about a community that is doing that individual artist support, you know? And I'd have to try to review and see if I can find that again. But I don't think we're the first to ever have done something like this. So the only real thought I had was, does it make sense on something like this to perhaps do it the grant itself to be allocated and distributed maybe 2 times a year. So it's not as if someone's, here's 4,000, make it through the whole year, it's all good, or should you say, here's your 4,000 when they're all just 2,000 and 2,000 6 months later, or something like that. I just think it might be worth thinking about whether it's a single distribution. I mean, the other thing is, unfortunately, people leave our town, you know, before they've want to, you know, for various housing or life problems or issues. So that was the only thing I was wondering is whether, you know, and I don't have a firm position on that. But the other thing, I think this is be a little bit of an example, but at Sydney Market, they offer a tuition reimbursement program, and it's I think $3,500 a year for anything you want to study if you'd like to continue your education. And it's not about just managing supermarkets. You know, you could study anything up to $21,000 over a 7-year period. And this is the same sort of investment in the quality of people and deliberately into arts. So I can support the program. I think it's very parallel.
Any other questions?
Not yet. We can come back to
I
this.
think I will after the next one, so I understand the distinctions more clearly.
Sorry, next. So the final proposed new division is asset and acquisition assistance. And what this is really about is helping our arts and cultural organizations upgrade their facilities and also essential materials. So it's not just about building a new wing or remodeling, but about providing an opportunity to purchase that important piece of educational equipment that you haven't been able to purchase, or things of that nature that will really make a quick community impact beyond just facility upgrades. But it also could be something, depending on council's direction here and comfort level of granting the maximum amount per individual grantee, right? It could be something like remodeling a classroom to bring it up to modern standards. Really not anticipating having the resources that we can make contributions to new construction, but about keeping facilities in a state where we're providing, helping organizations provide their maximum ability to contribute to the community. The risk, right, is that this is a little bit less tied to direct community outcomes than the other two grant divisions that we've discussed today. And we'll probably need to have relatively strict restrictions on financial health, right? We wouldn't want to make a permanent capital support for an organization that we're not comfortable is going to exist in a few years. So the potential pool of grantees for a program like this is maybe a little bit more limited than the other divisions, but can really make a impactful contribution to those that need it.
Questions?
Yeah. The one thing I had really thought about this one is whether it would be reasonable or smart to actually ask for some matching dollars, that this is put up as a matching grant for these new facilities improved or something like that. I'm not saying it has to be 1-to-1 or anything like that, but I think particularly many requests have come forward on boards I've been on, and it's always, well, if we make this a matching grant, maybe the county will chip in, or maybe other groups will chip in, or something like this, and make a little stone soup out of it. So I'd like to really evaluate whether or not matching should be a part of it or not. The second thing I think we really need to look at very carefully will be the security of the investment. If someone's asking us to invest X amount into a space rent situation and they're not going to have that lease more than 2 years, I'm going to think twice about it. That's just one kind of example. But how do you think about the security of the investment? The last thing you want is $500,000 to go into a program that declares bankruptcy and leaves the community a few months later or something. And I know you can't always see all unforeseen circumstances, but that would be a real key element to have secured in the application. So those are my main thoughts on that. And then, maybe this is a separate conversation from any of this, but it does come up at the same time for me, is that during some of our board interviews for Wheeler board members, and particularly pandemic time, we heard some really creative ideas from people about how to use the Wheeler better to maximize, whether there could be more of a broadcast studio from there for local artists and be able to get on a channel or record and broadcast there. There was just a lot of ideas about, and I want to make sure that as we move forward, bringing other groups up into the year 2025, we're not keeping the Wheeler at some level of this is how you've always operated. It's always live performances. You can't offer more to the community for arts. And we really heard some great ideas from some of those applicants of what they'd like to do to bring more community involvement in the Wheeler. And so that would be a separate thing. I want to make sure we're not shortchanging the Wheeler on any of its opportunities to advance. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I agree with the statement in my notes as well. I have a match funding system here. I also want to put out on the table for council that maybe we start this on the low end of staff's recommendations here. I have concern about this and about how we're going to allocate this. Definitely, the grantees need stable financials to qualify. This, to me, seems like the people that will be taking advantage of this will be the larger organizations probably, because you're talking about, capital needs and equipment needs that are expensive. So to me, I just put that on the table and let everybody just chew on that. But I would support the lower end of staff's recommendations on this, just as we get into this and we try it out, if council wants to try it out at all. Skippy?
Sorry. Yeah, so I was just trying to tease these apart. So this is exclusively for like physical buildings and improvements to those that pre-exist, or?
Not just,
Because I read equipment and all this, so I was confused. I was thinking like the first one was for the artist, sort of that continuing education thing. And then this might be where if I wanted to build a public statue or buy stage set to do performances, might come out of this bucket, but now
no,
that does.
you're on the right track there.
Not a statue.
Getting opposites.
Not a statue, but a stage set, to be clear.
But only in an existing public building, or not public building, sorry, only an existing building, or help me understand the buckets better.
Let me just ask, because a stage set to me is a one-time use thing for 3 months, and that would come out of their first bucket of their ongoing operations for this year's performance. The equipment, the tools to build stage sets that could be used year to year to year, those might come out of this.
That's correct. I misinterpreted your comment, your question there.
Or the building where that stage set is located.
To improve it.
To improve it, but, we're not going to be buying $10 million buildings out of this fund or starting someone's brand-new $15 million capital. I mean, they could be part of a matching to a larger fund perhaps, but not going to carry the whole weight.
A contribution to a capital campaign, at this time, staff does not recommend that be eligible for a request here. So to answer your question, a new facility wouldn't be out of the question. We just don't anticipate having the necessary funds available to make a meaningful impact for the construction of a new facility.
Okay, just so I understand, because the weighting of these is quite different, and we're starting something new, so I want to make sure I've got it straight. So random example, these don't exist, but say, Aspen Dance decides that they want to do, several times a year, a pop-up, in town, and so they need a little raised performance area that they can set up and use over and over through the years. Is that out of this fund, or could it be?
I wouldn't anticipate so. I think
Okay.
that would be more appropriate in the traditional arts and culture discretionary grant fund.
Okay, and if there's an individual artist that does amazing, those like 3D murals on the ground that, last for 3 weeks, but they're gonna do them all the time, that would come out of that first bucket, the artist bucket, or could that come out of
That
this?
would come out of the artist fellowship.
That would come
bucket.
out of the artist bucket, okay. Okay, I think I understand them. This may be a next slide, if it is, we can wait, but explain to me how we got to these numbers. Like, what was sort of the input, and how did we decide on the relative weight of these two new numbers?
So with the first program, right, and we can dig into this a little bit more during discussion time, but the overall theme here is trying to be present a number that is impactful and meaningful within the fund, within the goals of each division, right? And so the reality of having an asset and capital campaign is that you need a significant amount of funds to have a meaningful impact. For the Artist Fellowship Grant, after discussion with Lisa and Sarah here, we felt like an appropriate pilot could support 10 to 15 artists at a level that was meaningful and impactful at that individual level to reassess the program in the future to see if it's something that should expand or contract or continue into the future. For the primary traditional arts and culture grants, we funded at a $600,000 level last year, and felt like as the division with the most successful track record and the one that has the is easiest to scale, that increase between 800,000 and 1.2 million striked an appropriate balance between providing more support to the organizations, but not so much support that took away the discretion of our volunteer review committee's ability to prioritize the highest scoring applications.
Got it, okay, thank you.
Yeah, from a high-level policy on all of the grants organization is the geographic boundaries. Do we go to Glenwood? Do we go to Newcastle? Do we stop at Willits? What is our desire to support arts throughout the valley? That's part one. And the second question is, and I think we've hit upon the startups versus existing artists and organizations.
So to answer your first question, we're going to ask, it's actually one of our rhetorical questions back to you in 2 weeks, because we will be seeking direction from you in 2 weeks about, is there different weighting for different geographical regions? And so we can evaluate how that fits into the formula process and the decision-making criteria. And then I'll let John, if you want to speak to new and startups and how the program's been changed to support that.
So, and just to add to that, to the location eligibility, for these 3 divisions, it could be different location eligibility criteria for each of the different programs, right? So one could be broader and support the whole community, and then the others could be more restrictive based on council direction. So don't feel like they have to be all the same, because that's within our capacity to be more targeted there. And then could I ask you to repeat your question about startups?
Well, it's kind of the matching grants idea, but a startup organization or an existing organization. I don't know that I want to fully support a startup without a matching contribution from the startup itself.
For this particular.
All of them, really.
So for this program, I think that's absolutely was within staff's vision. Was it a brand new organization would need stable financials to qualify, and so I'm not sure. I think that we are in agreement there that a startup would need to provide stable financials to be eligible. I will provide a little clarity on some changes to the program that happened last year that we felt were very successful as staff, was actually removing the cap of funding that was available to new organizations. And that was driven by council's overall program philosophy that prioritized innovation. And we felt like opening up grant amounts of any amount to new organizations that were providing innovation in our community was important, and they still have to go through the same assessment and review from the review committees as any other organization, so they were vetted appropriately as any other organization, even though they were new. And that was welcomed in the community, and we were able to provide meaningful funding to new organizations this year.
One last clarification. This bucket, now that we can funnel funds to the red brick as well, would any red brick capital expenses come from this bucket, or would that be separate? It'd be separate.
No, the intention of the change was so that the red brick is not competing against our arts and culture organizations for funding.
Cool. Thank you.
So now we have a few questions for council. The first one is, do these 3 divisions as discussed here meet your vision for the expanded use of RET funding to support Aspen's cultural vibrancy?
And just procedurally, you're going to take our comments back and then kind of workshop them before the next work session, check in with the steering committee, and then come back at a regular meeting, and we'll give direction? Or what happens?
What I really want to know is if I'm starting 2 new programs.
Okay.
The last one is a budget decision that we'll make in October, that the council will provide direction on at that time. My understanding was the intention of going to the voters was to increase that amount substantially. And so adding a total of $600,000 new dollars, over the last 2 years is a big jump. It's in the amount of funding to these organizations. I was looking, we had 26 applications in that grant pool this year. So jumping the funding from 600,000 to $1 million, when you're averaging that 26, maybe we jump up to 30 or 35, that's still quite a bit of money for 35 applicants at $1 million. If you remember too, there's a 100,000, which we'll talk with you about in 2 weeks, there's a $100,000 cap per grantee right now. Then the other thing is that these other two new programs, maybe you're going to say to me, is you don't want to fund one of these other new programs. You want to wait another year before starting one of them, and you want to increase beyond that million perhaps here. And you're going to reduce one of the programs to increase the funding here. We're kind of ambivalent about it from a staff perspective, because we're saying there's a finite dollar, and here's some different ways besides the traditional program you could spend them based upon what we've heard from the community. And we'll follow your lead on what expansion you want to see. Do you want to see it just in the traditional program, or do you want to see it in these two other areas in any capacity?
And one other option that was mentioned in the memo and related to the asset and acquisition program specifically was the option to let funds accrue for a few years and then provide a much larger program every 3 years. So that instead of being a yearly program, it accrues funds for 2 years, and then in the third year issues those out. And that's something that we would like to consider in the future. In this year, we had considered doing it as a pilot program to establish community need and impact, and then perhaps moving to a less regular, higher dollar amount program in the future.
Sure.
I was just going to get us through the next two slides where we get down to some details about this. So this slide is really just a question on these three items, these three buckets that you've just heard about. So we can just go through this and thumb up or thumb down. We're going to get to specifics on the next slide. So.
You mean specific dollars?
Correct.
Okay.
So arts and cultural grants budget increase.
Yes.
There's 3, 4. And a nodding head. The Aspen Artist Fellowship Pilot Program, so direct dollars to artists in our community.
Are we going to comment on these? And
We sure are.
So, but generally, yes.
Right. And then the third one is this Asset and Acquisition Assistance Pilot Program. Does this sit well or not well with council members? Yes is down here.
Yes, to some degree.
I share your concerns with. I share your concerns, Tori, with asset and acquisition assistance for, in my mind, we don't want to be giving that money to the more well-established organizations that supposedly can take care of themselves. Also, and the matching grant.
Okay, so let's get to the next slide then, which kind of gets a little deeper into these. I hear that there's some discussion wanted for items B and C.
Just one quick comment on that is need has not been a criteria for our grant program. So if financial need is something that council would like us to take into consideration as a review criteria, I would like to discuss that further.
Can you repeat that, please?
So financial need has not been a review criteria. So prioritizing organizations who need funding more or
Right.
Yeah, so if that's something that the council would like us to provide direction on, I'd like to discuss that further.
Tough. Okay, so we get to this next slide then. Okay, so now we start talking about council members, what are your concerns, what are your suggestions, and how do you want to go about this? I think a real question is actually maybe the next slide could come before this one. So the next slide actually says this. So the discussion that we just had in these three buckets and creating these two new ones, is this satisfying council's desires for what we want to do with these funds moving forward? Is there some other bucket that you're actually thinking or thought of before? So let's talk about that, and then we'll go back to the previous slide. Did you have a comment here?
I do. Ward, were you raising your hand?
You can go ahead.
Yeah, this is great. I mean, it's so amazing to be able to even consider this in a community. It's really, really special. I think what I have here, we've talked about before, is capture, but I just want to talk about the vision and the things that stood out for me that I'm just so grateful we have in there. You know, a mentally healthy community connection, right? Really driving these efforts. I believe that this should be artist-led, right, or organization-led. And so I really want to empower them. That's why I was asking the question of what happens next, because I certainly want my or all of our comments to be filtered through that and really come from the artist community. Like, we're here to empower them. That feels really important to me. The 3 words that I wrote down, which I would say for the individual artist thing for sure, but can weave in here, are love, compassion, and connection. This 4th of July, we saw so much of that. Like, it really felt back, like it was everywhere in the town, right? The dancing, the performances, the lights, the live music. It was amazing, and you could feel it in the air, and everyone I talked to felt like Aspen was back. And this just so hit home for me because at the same time, there was a mass shooting in my hometown at the parade. And I just couldn't help when reading this packet to be thinking about the hundreds of people now annually who commit these crimes, who are in such places of absolute desperation that that's often their last act. And if somebody had just touched them in the right way a few years earlier, found the right connection, they had seen the band and decided to pick up the clarinet, someone just given them a hug, how different it could be. So I view the whole intention of this as just weaving that sense through our community, having it pop up everywhere. I think Rachel asked the question about accessibility. You know, free displays of random public art feels really important. For the individual artists, I would just give them that charge. How can you add a bit of delight, joy, fun, connection to all elements of our community and set them free, right? Whether they want to be ones painting Jersey barriers if we need that in the future, or decorating new infrastructure projects we've talked about.
So you're saying that you would see another bucket that is targeted towards community engage, what I wrote here, public performance / engagement.
Yeah, and it could be in these, it could be sort of the directive too, however you want to skin it. But I would love to say, we want to build love, compassion, connection, my words. They don't have to be our words, but community connection into the whole experience. And how can we use art and performance to manifest that in an artist-led way? Yeah.
Okay. And I think that's reflective of kind of the conversation that we've all been having
I've
as
been
well.
reading
So,
it
yeah.
and all these things, and it's amazing. And I just want it to be really crystal clear at this moment.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Do you have other comments there that you wanted to, or we'll come back to that?
The only other comments I had on the actual budgeting and numbers, I do want to be conservative to start. I'd rather be able to add over time than have to come back to build. That feels really important. And I don't mean this in a critical sense at all, but when I looked at the numbers for the artist program versus the capital program, I know it's not the intention, but I initially read it and thought, oh, as a community, we value sort of the buildings and the things 15 or 20 times more than the artists or the people. And I know that's not the intention at all, but I was concerned about that weighting for that reason, and that's why I was asking those detailed questions about, because maybe it's actually, that's going to the artist, but it's just because it's this type of thing over here. So I just want a bit more, I guess, kind of granular clarity as this comes back about exactly what those buckets are. And again, I think it's totally reasonable to start small and build. It's actually the smart thing to do. But that just stuck out to me as a note. And I know that's certainly not the intention, but it may to others.
Go to Ward and then Rachel.
Yeah, at this point, I can't think of another bucket to add. I think as we go through the next year, with the intention of what this council is, where we'd like to focus some of the areas, the mental health and accessibility that has been expressed by Skippy, and I think all of us, that I think all those three previous buckets that we'll go back to on the next to last slide, perhaps we don't need to fund on the high side for capital, maybe that we need that to grow a bit, start off slowly there, so that we don't have to start all three of those at the same level. And capital, a 3-year capital growth bucket building might be appropriate, but I can envision something that couldn't fit into those 3 buckets, particularly with guidance from this council as to where we want to see an emphasis and how the arts grant committee applies those, and how the workshops for the people that are getting the grants understand where we want to focus. So if we visit this a year from now, I might have something that I could contribute, but I think that the 3 buckets identified, if we have those as a lens to filter our desire for the community, I'd like to see that for the next year.
Thanks, Ward. Rachel?
Yeah, thank you. I have a different concept of art, Skippy, than you just expressed, in a way that it has, and I can respect the sentiment in which you're offering it, but art often expresses angst, and it expresses protest, and it expresses oppression and what's wrong in society. And if our direction is, hey, this has to be about love and connections, that, to me, that feels like covering up things as opposed to what's there. I mean, women right now are pretty upset about what's happened with their citizenship.
Men are upset about it too.
Yeah, and a lot of men are too. I would agree with that. But, you know, so I don't know that we can give direction to art. I agree with the connection part, and I'd love to have it help heal people, but that's not a mission to me. That's like hiring people to do a specific thing, and art is something that's different in every individual who may get this grant. And if we ask, are you going to do protest art? Are you going to write blues songs about how blue things are for the workers? Well, you're not going to get any money. You know, I mean, I can't see that criteria at all. So I apologize. I know what we're wanting to do is create greater connection through art, and I can see that. But sometimes it's connection in the protest, and it's connection, you know, in the upset with the Supreme Court over the gun laws, you know, as opposed to let's just be happy and pretend all that's not happening. And so that's, I'm sorry if that's.
Rachel, can I
Yeah, please.
surprise you with this comment. I completely agree with you. Love doesn't have to be this. Connection doesn't have to be this. We saw at the Jazz Cafe a gospel singer who was doing a very live gospel protest about those.
I just want to say, I'm sorry, I don't want to go too far into it, Skippy.
Rachel, I'm not arguing with you.
I know you're not.
I'd like
I
the
know you're not.
opportunity to respond because I'm listening to you.
Okay.
Yeah. That singer was doing nothing short of a protest on all those things you said. And it was sad and it was upsetting, and there were people crying in the crowd, and those people left feeling more connected to community as a result. So I don't think there's a Rorschach test about how you express your art, but I do think at this moment to be lucky enough to be in a community like this that can inspire connection through art is fundamentally important, should be focused on.
Again, I agree entirely, and I think that's why we support the arts and enjoy the arts. But I just didn't want it to be that this has to be a message to the artists that we're going to give money to, that your art has to be about love.
No, that's
Okay, that's all. I just, that, you know, this is to support an artist's growth, not give them direction on the art. You know, when I also agree with Ward that these 3 buckets should pretty much cover everything that we'd like to see. I also disagree about the ratios in those, because the grant startup for artists is a pilot program. We have to see what the success ratio of it is, and how that money is used, and how it's deployed, and how it goes forward. and maybe this comes from having worked with the Red Brick a long time ago in that very narrow election that saved us that facility. But a lot of people are, there was a lot of comments about how flaky artists are and how artists won't pay their rent, artists this and artists that and artists that. And I don't want to come out in the first year and say, hey, we threw $150,000 at artists and we're hoping it turns out and it's a pilot program. I'd rather start relatively small in a way our staff can really manage it and we can see that it's successful.
That's what I said.
Well, you had said you'd rather see a much different, because for me, capital is not about us respecting or needing buildings. It's knowing that people do things in buildings. And anytime that GrassRoots or KJAX is needed to replace their decks and their computer equipment, it's usually a $150,000, $200,000 thing. When the library is able to install with a digital printers or the 3D printers, that's an expensive piece of equipment. And so I see the capital and the assets as things that people use and deploy, and similar, it's almost, your comment to me was like, we could say, oh, we don't need to do the armory. The armory is just a building. And it's not. It's what we're going to put inside the armory, and it's the things that happen there. So I don't want to diss off on the capital side at all. And, I know I'm jumping ahead here, but I was looking at the numbers, and I would kind of hit somewhere in the mid-range of all three of those. And I'd go 900,000 for the traditional grants. That's increasing it significantly. 50,000 for the pool for individual artists. And a little higher than you, I'd go 750,000, and in the middle on the capital assets. And that is basically $1.1 million more than we distributed this year, with the 600,000 being distributed. And it's about $500,000 less than the top of range that our staff had recommended for those three pools. So kind of cutting it right in the middle. But that's how I would look at it. I am flexible on any of those numbers. But I think, we've seen what has happened to any number of facilities that you slowly just dust them off, but you don't really repair them or clean them up. And I think that there's a lot of facilities that are like that, and a lot of equipment and new modern technologies that really help bring art to people and people to integrate into art more. So I wouldn't want to shortchange that area of the capital, but I would very clearly ask for some matching contributions. This shouldn't be a wish list Santa Claus thing, but that we know what those organizations are putting towards it.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just this question, an additional bucket. I really want to look at Sarah and ask her the question about what Skippy's kind of talking a little bit to. We've had some conversations about public arts, a public arts commission. I think we have a meeting coming in August where we're going to revisit that.
Arts Council?
Some sort.
We'll talk about public art. We have no recommendation to start a public art commission, or you have a lot of boards and commissions already. I'd be a little hesitant to add another right now. But the arena of public art, I would not have it compete against your other grantees. That's a program that you can fund independently using the same revenue source.
Right.
But I would fund it directly to the Red Brick Center for the Arts to administer that program. That should be, in my opinion, a well-developed program that is a juried process, and that there is a process of which site selection happens, things of that nature that are all critically important before you ever think about what is the actual art piece that you're commissioning. And a commissioning process can easily, be $500,000 for this community, depending upon the scale and the caliber of artist and experience you're looking for, as well as the maintenance requirements. So I would encourage you to consider public art that's permanent art in the community outside of these grant dollars as a separate program. That Sarah has been working on a proposal about how to do some community engagement around this. We've been talking with a few key partners in the community about how would we have this as a community conversation to even see if the community wants us to spend money this way.
Yeah, and there's a little difference here. We're not just talking about sculptures. We're also talking about performance and the like. So are we scheduled to talk about that in August? Or
I don't believe, I reviewed the work session calendar and you're not on there. No, and she's working on it. Did your info only go out while I was gone?
What's that?
Did your info only go out while I was gone on Coco's work?
Yes, that had gone out earlier when she was installing it in May. We are
You have to be at a microphone really for all this.
we are gonna address the,
Sorry about that, Sarah again from the Red Brick. We are going to address the public art conversation in the 2023 budget cycle. So requesting dollars then to hold a community conversation on public art, like Sarah said, to see if there's interest from the community to have tax dollars, money spent on it, and also an educational component so that the community can learn what is a public arts program, how different cities set them up, how they're funded differently, and then the role of public art, and being able to hear from artists directly why they work in the space and the benefit it could have for a community. So the process for a public art is, again, in the 2023 budget, and one that we want to just be very thoughtful with. And thorough. So, yeah.
okay.
I agree with Ward. I think they could fit in any of the other three choices.
Okay.
I want to thank Alyssa and John for reminding us what the ballot language was. I think that's an important part of what we're trying to do here. And yeah, I think starting at a little lower level makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay. Let's go to the previous slide then and talk some details. Great. So on the table, Rachel has weighed in with kind of her levels. I'm going to just go ahead and throw mine out. The arts and cultural grants, I would start at the low end and stair step up. So I guess she was at 900. I would say 800, but I don't mind 900. That's great. It's at the low end. So I'll join in at 900 for my vote. Aspen Art Fellowship, 60. I'd go to the top of that range. They're talking about the opportunity to fund potentially 15 people. What is that, $4,000 per grantee kind of thing? I would, again, for me, this was part of the reason to even do the arts grant, is to get monies to artists, not just the big organizations around that. So I would, instead of 50, I would just say on the high end of that, and the 60. And then, again, as I advocated before, I had a lot of questions around this asset and acquisition. I'd like to see what happens with it. So I'd start at the 500. Rachel's suggestion was in the middle, which was staff's recommendation at 750,000. So just throwing that out there, does anybody have any immediate feelings on those funding levels? 900, 60, and somewhere in the range of 500 to 750 on the asset and acquisition. I'm going to start with Ward.
Yeah, my feeling is that I would like to be flexible on this instead of setting an absolute number to see what the strength of the grant applications are, and perhaps giving the grant committee some leeway. On the asset and acquisition, I think I'd like to start on the lower end of that and let that grow. And as that fund, or as we have more funds, evaluate how we want to spend those. But that would be the only one. I would like to encourage innovation, and the exchange between Skippy and Rachel about art. I think art is like architecture. It can mean different things to me from day to day.
Same day.
Yeah, I was particularly struck by some artwork by Ukrainian people I saw in Poland. Some of them are rage. They're outrage. They're expressing the rage of the people, and others are sorrow. But how that affects me can change by what kind of mood I'm in. So to try to put art into a particular bucket, I don't think, for me anyway, it doesn't work too well. But, so in direct answer, I'd rather be flexible on it. I can see the Art Fellowship being on the high end. Perhaps if we have some really strong grants, even going beyond that. But we've got the money. I think the 71% of the people agree that we should be spreading it around more. We have a good reserve in the Wheeler. So I'd rather not tie the hands on the grants committee and give them perhaps some flexibility. If we have some outstanding requests, I'd like to be able to use the funds.
Yeah. Ward, I agree with you entirely, but, and I think the message, as these guys have told us, is to say you don't have to allocate the whole pool, whatever it's given, but they still need a pool number to start with. And not, hey, we could go back to council and ask for 2 million if we needed to, or, you know, we're only gonna give out X. I mean, they still need a target number for that committee to kind of be working with.
And tonight, we're just looking for straw polling from you, because again, I need to go back and model this and
Right.
compare it to the capital needs at the Wheeler and the capital needs at the Red Brick. So getting your individual positions is extremely helpful. I'm not expecting council to come to an agreement tonight.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I, like Ward said, I don't know the exact number for A, but I agree with Tori's philosophy of let's increase it. That's why we did or a big part of why we did this, but let's stay on the lower end so we can scale up. That makes sense to me, but I look forward to you guys coming back with a number. On B, I'd go to the higher end. It's a small difference. I think it'll make a big difference in people's lives. C, I just don't feel like I have enough information. Like people have said, and like you said, part of the reason this number's big is because capital campaigns are expensive, and they may last for 50 years, but I sort of don't know what's out there, and it could change so dramatically year to year. It's kind of hard for me to say at this point. So I do want to do this, but it's really hard for me to say at this point what that level is, and I don't know how I get more information to hone in. Otherwise, I can trust in the power of my colleagues.
It'll be learning experience for all of us, and that's what they were saying, is that they're interested to see what they're gonna get for requests. What do you feel, how do you feel about the suggestion of matching funds in that, for this first year, for this pilot program, asset and acquisition, matching funds?
For larger capital campaigns, matching funds, it doesn't have to be.
It's not a
We
capital campaign.
already had said we cannot contribute to capital campaigns. These are one-offs and one-year things. That was what John said. We don't.
That's our recommendation, is we don't make a contribution to
So, Mr. Mayor, maybe after you get through the five of you, I have some suggestions of next steps to help provide some clarity for everyone on some of these issues.
So yes, in some circumstance, you understand matching and the goal of that.
Well, now I feel like I either don't understand what the word capital campaign means, or I don't know what we're talking about. So
Capital improvements, so yes, hard stuff, building improvements, sound equipment, tools, paint, whatever it is that an organization may need.
okay, the difference is it's not a new structure.
Correct, short of a,
Sorry, my mistake. What was the question?
just about matching, how you felt about wanting matching.
Yeah, so for
large capital
larger
investment.
capital improvement grants, I would like to see others contributing. I think that makes sense. These numbers can be big, and for big numbers, there should be multiple people involved. There may be other requests that are quite small where that would be less important to me.
Okay, that's good. John?
I think it's a great start.
Okay.
So the one that has the most sort of cloud of lack of clarity is C, right? What I would suggest in terms of process is that we focus really on making sure we get A, your core program ramped up, ready to go, because the application period will open in early November. And we spend our time between now and I would say maybe March of next year developing Program B. And we'll keep working and tinkering on C, but let's get B up and going before we really dive into C. And I want to check with you if that's okay, so that we can deliver the Artist Fellowship more quickly and getting that launched, hopefully, sometimes toward the end of first quarter, beginning of second quarter of next year. and then we'll figure out this asset and acquisition. You know, I know we're talking kind of a long time from now, but I think I want to make sure we get 1 and 2 really, A and B really dialed in, because it sounds like we need a lot more conversation around C.
And it also sounds like A and B are a priority for council, so.
In general, that's what I heard, but what I'm hearing too is C needs to happen.
Yeah, at some point.
But I'm asking, can it be towards the end of next year that we open up that period?
I'd rather move forward with it. I just.
So if we're doing all 3 of them, they all go slower,
Hey,
right?
I understand.
I have a question. What is the cycle? What are the dates when the grants are open and when they're closed for evaluation, when they're given, and how that relates to our fiscal year?
Well, the grant period opens in November and it closes in early January. You make an appropriation decision in December, when you make your final vote on the budget. And then we bring you back the grantees in April? Is that right? I'm looking over here. In April.
For the standard traditional
Right,
grants program.
for the traditional grants program, and you pass a resolution authorizing the distribution of those funds in April. We've talked about B and C up here, not necessarily being on the same cycle. That's a lot of work at the same time.
Right.
We need to space some of this out through the year to run these programs well.
Both for staff and potential applicants, right?
Applicants,
Because
right.
the same organizations would be eligible to apply for A and C, right? And so we don't want to ask them to submit 2 complex applications at the same time.
And John, something that I heard you mention that carried a lot of weight with me is that to have a workshop on how organizations can write a successful grant, what you're looking for, what the weighting is. And also after the distribution last year, the availability that you made available to people for a debrief on how perhaps their application came in short, so that people, I really appreciate being available for that in the past and being proactive to having this workshop this fall for people to put their grant requests in order. So thank you for that.
Of course.
Okay, I think these are prioritized in the way that we see them as well. If what staff is asking and Sarah is agreeing with is that there's a timing and a process to getting these things done, I think we're understanding of that. Rachel has said, like, yeah, we do want to see this. You brought it to us, and the answer is yes, we want to see it go. My assumption from you guys is that on item C is that you've heard a little from maybe organizations, or that this is something that they would be interested in. That's my assumption, is that this didn't just come out of the.
I would not make that assumption. I've been hit up for a lot of capital campaigns since the ballot, and I have said that's a discussion that has not occurred yet at the council table. And that I think that's why I think there's a lot more discussion that needs to be had. There's some members of our leaders in our arts community that very much thinks the tax dollars should not be used in capital campaigns, and there's some that are. So our arts leadership in our community is split on this.
Is that broken down by those who need support and who don't?
Long time ago in a place far, far away, there were a group of desert fathers, and they had a cloud of uncertainty. And I think C is the cloud of uncertainty in the grants program for us.
The Desert Father?
Okay,
So what we'll go, just to recap, what we'll do is we're going to focus first on the grants program expansion. We'll do the modeling on how much money there with the 60,000 for the artists. And then we'll come back to you and say, what it sounds like where our most scalable opportunity is C. And we will, we'll work on the budget numbers side of that. And then I'm fully supportive of starting small and more restrictive on C. Get a feel for it, and then you can loosen it. It's a lot harder to pull back, right? And so we can work with that to put something together. And I'm sure we're going to be back to you in work session about C for a lot more detailed discussion. When we get together in 2 weeks is really the big policy conversation about how do people access these funds. I just want to be clear in that conversation, we will not be talking about the artist fellowship. Okay, so the report and the information we're bringing back to you is about the nonprofits, the arts organizations, and the health and human service organizations collectively. And we anticipate that there'll probably have to be a little bit of follow-up conversation on the Artist Fellowship. But I just want you to know that don't let that hold you back from what you think should be happening with the rest of the programming in that conversation in 2 weeks. We can put that one to the side.
I think there is one other piece of this conversation that I'm hearing from council members, and that's about that community connection. And whether or not these funds are the appropriate funds for some of that. And, you know, to me, it's not just about public art, but maybe using public art for that community connection or events. You know, over the last couple of years, when we bring this up, we talk about the community picnics and things like that. And so I'm wondering, and what I heard from both Rachel and Skippy, even though it was a different take maybe on detail, was that is something that we are hoping that our arts and cultural grant program includes. Is community connection.
Fosters.
And fosters that. And so, and I don't know, and Sarah, I just kind of lay this on the table for you, is there's a lot of that stuff that happens. A lot of our grants that go out in the grant program are expected with community return. And truly we see that from whether it's Dance Aspen doing community programming at the Aspen Art Museum for free, you know, or if it's the music students that are out on the mall busking, you know, and adding that to our lives. But I do hear that there's some desire for us to have a conversation about community connection through the arts. And I don't know if this is where the funding source should come from. But I just want to make sure that conversation is still going on for us.
Certainly, this is one of the things of where I actually am trying to get together with Crystal Logan at the Aspen Institute as the arts and culture representative on the ACRA board. Because I'm asking her, what's the next phase of the arts and culture study? So you said what kind of economic impact you've had. Now let's talk about the other pieces and where does that need to go? And can there be a community plan? And these are the kinds of things that should be guiding principles in a community look at cultural arts and those assets rather than just the economics piece of it, and more, rather than reporting what we did, talking about where are we going and seeing if we can get the arts community to come together to do that. So we'll keep you posted, but I think there's some merits into really encouraging that community to come back to us. Generally, the government can lead it, but I think you'll get more if the government doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Further comments? Rachel?
Yeah, just kind of for next meeting, I am in agreement with everything that has shook out at the meeting, and good discussion. Thank you for the hard work. When we get to the next time, and it may be the time after the next time, but I really want to get a better look at the numbers, you know, and you kind of mentioned that already, but just to understand how the accounting will happen in the future. That there's the traditional Wheeler Reserve Fund now, we have new money coming in now, X amount, and let's say it's a great year again, X amount goes towards the Wheeler operations, X amount goes towards these limited amounts that we've allocated towards these programs, but there's excess again. Does that now fall into a new Wheeler Grants Reserve so that we have, or does it go into the other Wheeler Reserve that we can't touch in bad years?
No. All it is a different, it's just an accounting process that we have, for example, on the long-range plan for the
Right.
fund. There'll be ones that show what were the dollars prior to December 10th, 2021, and what are the revenues after that. And each year, there'll have to be a decision of when those new costs come in, the council will need to choose how much to charge to each one of those different lines.
Yeah, the thing is, though, that we also are talking about, well, let's let the capital fund build up some more now. You know, let's stay low so they could build up. Well, I'm trying to get to how do we build it up? Because again, if it's a great year and the Wheeler can be fully funded, its operations out of the RET that year, but we're only doing a limited amount of grants, we're not spending it all, and so there's still some revenues left, it's not going into the old Wheeler Reserve because those are controlled, those can't be used, so now it's over here as new grant revenue. And is that how we start to build it up so that maybe we could do larger grants on capital or on any of the other categories in the future?
The short answer is yes.
Okay.
That is exactly how you do it and why you maintain the two different line items. So that if you come and you say, for the next 3 years, you want 50% of whatever the cost of the Wheeler to be charged to bring down that fund balance to get it at,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, that, maybe that would bring it down to like 18 million. And then you want to move back so you're not giving it all away every year of the new money, so to speak, but you're building up that reserve there as well. So at the end of the day, because, right, the financial policies can be written, if you want, to that level of specificity for this fund. And it's a discussion point that Pete and I want to bring back to the council because there's still not been direction to change the reserve policy of this fund.
Yeah.
But we keep acting like it needs to be way bigger. And so we need to really get that reconciled.
Right.
For the financials and, quite frankly, for discussions with the community, because we have to explain why are we keeping $30+ million in this fund. It's a really hard thing to justify. in
No,
my view.
I agree with you entirely, and so I guess I was just saying, I really want to get down into the numbers a little bit and understand how we're accounting for it in the future so that it's not mixing with the conserved Wheeler money that can't be granted to arts in any way, because, I just assume they're different pots now.
Sure, and we can meet with you one-on-one to go over what that looks like on the general ledger and what it looks like in our own tracking, and then how we handle the reporting of that with the auditors as well. There's several steps about how we use checks and balances on those dollars.
Great, thank you.
Anything more?
No, I think we have clear direction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you guys so much for all this.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Sarah.
Thank
Welcome
you to
back.
Sarah and Lisa.
Yeah.
And I just want to recognize Teresa. She sat here all night through this. She's been one of our rock star steering committee members to really help, usher our grants program into this new bright future.
Will you be applying
you.
for yarn?
We'll be applying for yarn, and I will be sitting on the mall knitting publicly.
I love that. I love that. As the babies come by and try on their hats.
All right, that is our agenda item for this evening. We want to thank GrassRoots, of course, and thank you guys for being here. Have a wonderful evening. We are back next Monday with a work session.